morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tammy McConnell, and I'm with the Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization at Ohio EPA. I will be moderating today's webinar. This morning's webinar, Hazardous Waste Rules, What's Coming Down the Line, is part of Ohio EPA's 2020 Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference. These webinars will occur over a 3-week period from September 21 through October 8. Please visit our conference webpage for more information about sessions you may have missed and to register for our upcoming sessions. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items to help you participate in today's event. On this slide, you will see a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. For this webinar, you are using your computer audio. If you are having sound issues, you will need to refresh your browser. If that does not work, log off, then log back in. And if that does not work, check your computer audio settings. Please feel free to submit questions by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send your questions in at any time during this presentation. We will be answering them as we go through the presentation, as well as addressing some during the Q&A session of the presentation. If we do not have time to answer your question, presenters will reach out to you via email and assist you with your question after the presentation is over. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the presentation is available in the handouts section of your attendee interface. Once the webinar is edited, you will receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email, along with a session survey and a certificate of attendance. The session survey will also appear once the session is over. We would greatly appreciate it if you could take the time to complete the survey to let us know how we are doing, or if there is anything we can do to further assist you. This session is approved for 1 hour of registered sanitarian and sanitarian in training credit. If you did not submit your RS SIT number in the CEU ID number box when registering, please make sure you provide us with your number through the Q&A feature. This session is also approved for 1 VAP Certified Professional Development Hour Unit credit. Submit your session attendance certificate with your Certified Professional Renewal application to Ohio EPA's VAP Certified Professional Program. This session is also approved for 1 BMP hour towards annual education requirements for CNDD certified operators. You can submit your session attendance certificate with your certified operator application or renewal form to Ohio EPA CNDD operator certification program. Attendees seeking American Planning Association credit may do so through APA's self-reporting option. Log into your My APA account and select the self-reported credits option to receive credit. If you are seeking another CEU, please refer to our agenda available on the conference landing page at epa.ohio.gov/compliance_conference or visit Ohio EPA's webpage at epa.ohio.gov and click on the 2020 Virtual Compliance Assistance Conference scrolling banner at the top of the page. As I mentioned, I will be the moderator for this session. Our speakers today will be Tammy Heffelfinger, discussing 2 of our new hazardous waste rules that will soon be adopted, and Paula Cantor, discussing the RCRA Info Industry Act. Both speakers are from Ohio EPA's Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization. With that, I am going to turn it over to our first presenter, Tammy Heffelfinger.
Thank you, Tammy. As Tammy mentioned, I'm going to talk to you today about two of our new rules that we are adopting. And Paula is going to be going over USCPA's RCRA Info Industry app, which is amazing. And she's going to talk about specifically My RCRA ID and e-manifest and what the benefits of those are to you. So, as I mentioned, these two new rules that I'm going to talk about are the airbag waste rule and the hazardous waste pharmaceutical rule. These two rules are in our most recent rule package, and we do anticipate them becoming effective on October 5th, which I would like to point out is this coming Monday. The new airbag waste rule is an exemption from the hazardous waste regulations for the handler. And the new hazardous waste pharmaceutical rule includes new management standards for healthcare facilities and reverse distributors. The airbag waste rule is pretty short and simple, but I want to give you some background information first to help explain the origin of this rule. If you recall, there was a time where airbags of vehicles were essentially exploding and causing injury and sometimes even death for the drivers or passengers of those vehicles. It was determined that these airbags were defective and they had been manufactured by Takata. So this was a problem, and there was an urgency to remove these defective airbags from vehicles. So USCPA wanted to help facilitate that by exempting the collection of this defective airbag waste from hazardous waste requirements as long as certain conditions are met. These defective airbags are hazardous waste when disposed because they exhibit the characteristics of ignitability due to the oxidizer, which is used as part of the gas-generating propellant, and reactivity because they are readily capable of explosive reaction if heated under confinement. Now, generally, non-defective airbag modules and inflators could be exempt from hazardous waste regulations under certain scenarios. For example, if they're being reused. But none of those exemptions would apply to these defective airbags because they cannot be safely reused or deployed. The defective Takata airbags were using a phase-stabilized ammonium nitrate as the propellant, which degrades over time as it's exposed to humidity and high temperatures. This diagram shows the parts of an assembled airbag module located in the steering column of a vehicle. The module consists of a fabric cushion and the metal inflator. The propellant located inside of the inflator is in a tablet form. As the ammonium nitrate tablet absorbs moisture and is exposed to heat, it breaks down into more of a powder. And this causes that reaction to take place much quicker and more violently, causing the metal canister to rupture and produce shrapnel. So here's a timeline of the events that took place. The Department of Transportation issued one of the largest nationwide recalls in history and a preservation order, which required Takata to collect and store those airbags. Now, during this time, since they weren't being discarded, they weren't subject to the hazardous waste regulations. That preservation order was then amended in 2018, at which point the defective airbags being removed from vehicles were no longer being stored. So the dealers could still send them to Takata, but they had to pay, or they could send them to a TSD for disposal. These costs were an impediment to the removal of these defective airbags, and the defective airbags create an unreasonable risk of serious injury or death. So USCPA wanted to expedite that removal process. And they also needed to get all of those other airbags that were in storage out of storage and properly managed. Which leads us to our first poll question. Have you had to have an airbag in a vehicle you own replaced due to a recall?
The polls have been launched. If you do not see it yet, it should pop up in a second. Please make your selections now. We're having a lot of response. If you have not already responded, please do so now. We will be closing the polls momentarily. Okay, looks like they have stopped. The polls are going to be closing. Tammy, it looks like 76% said no and 24% said yes.
I have to say I'm surprised by that because I had multiple vehicles myself that were subject to that recall. So that is surprising. I would have expected a higher number of people to say yes, but regardless, it is what it is. So here's what the rule allows. Airbag waste is exempt from RCRA at the airbag handler during transport to an airbag collection facility or a hazardous waste designated facility, as long as certain conditions are met. There's a maximum of 250 units that can be accumulated at the handler facility. They can only be stored for up to 180 days. They have to be labeled as airbag waste, do not reuse. Don't want any confusion there. They have to be packaged and shipped to address the risk that they pose, and that includes ignitability and reactivity. The airbag waste has to be sent directly to one of those two facilities. They have to comply with DOT requirements and maintain shipping records. At the designated facility or airbag waste collection facility, the airbag waste then becomes subject to the hazardous waste regulations. And what that means is that collection facility is considered the generator of that waste. This airbag waste exemption also includes non-Takata airbag waste. And so managing all airbag waste under the same protective requirements will avoid confusion, increase efficiency, and help prevent non-Takata airbag waste from being diverted into the municipal waste stream. We want to point out that any reuse of the defective airbags would be considered sham recycling and is strictly prohibited. So that's the airbag rule in a nutshell. Let's move on to the new hazardous waste pharmaceutical rule. US EPA issued a final rule for the management standards for hazardous waste pharmaceuticals, including an amendment to the P75 listing for nicotine. And this is a sector-specific rule for healthcare facilities and reverse distributors who manage hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. Our new rules can be found in Ohio Administrative Code 3745-266-500 through 510, and those should be available on our website right now. The main areas that I'm going to cover for this rule today include the amendment for certain nicotine products, the sewer ban, management standards and definitions for healthcare facilities and reverse distributors, and then changes to the empty container requirements for pharmaceuticals. Now, this nicotine amendment is a really big deal for all of the pharmacies carrying FDA-approved over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapies, because this is going to impact their generator status and their obligations overall under RCRA. US EPA determined that based on a review of available toxicity information, that these particular over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapies do not meet the acute listing criteria. So gums, patches, and lozenges will no longer carry that P75 listing. And I want to point out that this does not include vape products or e-cigarettes. The sewer ban portion of the rule went into effect in all states back in August of 2019. And the reason they did this was, number one, studies had shown that flushing leftover medication had become a prevalent practice used in lieu of proper hazardous waste management. Number two, there's no current national effluent limitations or pretreatment standards that apply to healthcare facilities discharging pharmaceuticals to POTWs, and many POTWs don't have the technology to remove the pharmaceuticals. And finally, number three, pharmaceuticals entering the environment through flushing or other means have a negative effect on aquatic ecosystems and on fish and animal populations. So for these reasons, US EPA developed the sewer ban so that at a minimum, healthcare facilities and reverse distributors could no longer dispose of the hazardous waste pharmaceuticals by drain. And of course, Ohio EPA strongly discourages sewering of any pharmaceutical by any entity. The goal of Subpart P is to establish rules that are less burdensome than existing hazardous waste regulations for the healthcare industry. You have a wide variety of hazardous waste that would be generated in small quantities by a number of different employees across the facility, and these healthcare personnel typically don't have the expertise to make hazardous waste determinations, and this ultimately contributes to compliance issues. Once a facility is subject to Subpart P, there's no longer any generator categories. There's no requirement to track how much is generated per month, and acute and non-acute hazardous waste pharmaceuticals can be commingled. So because of this, there's an incentive for facilities to manage all of their pharmaceuticals as hazardous. All right, let's talk about some of the key definitions that the rule establishes. A pharmaceutical is going to include any of the following: an electronic nicotine delivery system. This is going to include electronic cigarettes or vaping pens and the pre-filled cartridges or vials. It's also going to include any drug or dietary supplement for use by humans or animals. This definition will include, but is not limited to, dietary supplements as defined by the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, prescription drugs, over-the-counter drugs, homeopathic drugs, compounded drugs, investigational new drugs, pharmaceuticals remaining in non-empty containers, personal protective equipment contaminated with pharmaceuticals, and cleanup material from spills of pharmaceuticals. Now, I do want to point out this definition is not including dental amalgam or sharps. The definition of a healthcare facility is any person who is lawfully authorized to do either of two things. Number one, provide any of these services listed here. That includes preventative, diagnostic, therapeutic, rehabilitative, maintenance, or palliative care, and this applies to humans or animals, or distribute, sell, or dispense pharmaceuticals, including over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, dietary supplements, homeopathic drugs, or prescription pharmaceuticals. A reverse distributor receives prescription pharmaceuticals from healthcare facilities for the purposes of verifying manufacturer credit. This rule also identifies 3 different types of hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. Non-creditable hazardous waste pharmaceutical means a prescription hazardous waste pharmaceutical that does not have a reasonable expectation to be eligible for any manufacturer credit, or a non-prescription hazardous waste pharmaceutical that does not have a reasonable expectation to be legitimately used or reclaimed. Items could include contaminated PPE and spill cleanup materials, and these items would go directly to a TSDF for disposal, and they are generated at the healthcare facility. Potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceutical means a prescription hazardous waste pharmaceutical that has a reasonable expectation to receive some sort of manufacturer credit. It has to be in original manufacturer's packaging, undispensed, and either unexpired or less than 1 year past the expiration date. You would find these at both healthcare facilities and a reverse distributor. And finally, we have evaluated hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. And these are the prescription hazardous waste pharmaceuticals that have been evaluated by the reverse distributor for manufacturer credit. They're not going to be sent to another reverse distributor for further evaluation. This type of hazardous waste pharmaceutical is found at reverse distributors. So based on the definition of a healthcare facility, these are just some examples of the types of facilities that would meet that definition. And these are pretty obvious, like hospitals, physicians' offices, pharmacies, veterinary clinics, chiropractors, retailers of over-the-counter medications. And now we're going to test your knowledge. Here's your next poll question. If a manufacturing facility has a clinic within the facility that provides first aid and medicines for employees, would that clinic be considered a healthcare facility? Yes or no?
Okay, everybody, the polls have been launched. Once it pops up there, make your selection. Okay, we have about 75% has voted. If you haven't already, please do so. We will be closing the polls momentarily. Okay, the polls have been closed, and it looks like we have 67% saying yes and 33% saying no, Tammy.
All right. Well, it looks like the majority of you got the answer correct. Because that clinic is dispensing medication, it would be considered a healthcare facility. All right. This table provides a summary of the requirements for healthcare facilities generating potentially creditable and non-creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. As you can see, the potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals don't have a lot of management requirements because they're being sent to the reverse distributor for a potential manufacturer credit. The non-creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals, on the other hand, do have all sorts of labeling, container standards, maximum accumulation time requirements. I want to point out that if the facility manages all their pharmaceutical waste as hazardous, they do not have to do individual waste determinations for those. They just manage them all as hazardous. And neither of these would be required to be reported on the biennial report. A reverse distributor is a new type of hazardous waste management facility that can only accept hazardous waste that is potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. And while they do receive hazardous waste, there's no storage permit required. These facilities generally have to follow LQG-like management requirements. They have to submit a one-time notification to let us know of their activities, keep an inventory of their hazardous waste pharmaceuticals at the facility, and comply with security requirements to prevent unauthorized access. So here's the summary table for the management standards for potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals and the evaluated pharmaceuticals. The potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals at the reverse distributor don't have any labeling requirements, inspection of container accumulation area requirements, and they don't have to be included on the biennial report. They do have to inventory any of those potentially creditable hazardous waste pharmaceuticals within 30 days of arrival at the facility to determine if they're destined for another reverse distributor, at which point they would still be considered potentially creditable, or if they're destined for the TSD because they have already been evaluated. The evaluated pharmaceuticals do have weekly inspection requirements for the on-site accumulation area. They have to be labeled as hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. The containers have to be in good condition and managed to prevent any leaks. This waste would be included on a biennial report, and there's a maximum accumulation time of 180 days after evaluation. And finally, I want to share with you the new empty container standards for pharmaceuticals, which specify circumstances in which the residues in those pharmaceutical containers are not regulated as hazardous waste because they would be considered RCRA empty. There are 3 types of containers identified in the rule that are found in a healthcare setting. Stock dispensing bottles and unit dose containers are considered empty when the pharmaceuticals have been removed using the practices commonly employed to remove materials. Triple rinsing of containers with acute hazardous waste pharmaceuticals is not required or even allowed anymore. Syringes would be considered empty when the plunger is fully depressed, and IV bags are empty when the contents are fully administered. Any other containers, such as inhalers, nebulizers, tubes of ointments, gels, or creams, are regulated under the normal empty container regulations in 3745-5107, and acute hazardous waste pharmaceuticals in these types of containers simply cannot be considered RCRA empty. So that's my overview of those 2 new rules. If you have any questions, please feel free to chat them in now or contact me afterward. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Paula Cantor.
The new rules have 5 new notification requirements that I'm going to talk about. And one of them is related to the pharmaceutical rule, where a healthcare generator that will be regulated under the new rules has to notify using the site identification form within 60 days after the rule is effective, which will be Monday, October the 5th. CESQGs that want to opt into these new rules have to update their EPA ID number or obtain one if they don't already have one. Ohio EPA expects to receive hundreds of submissions, so we're requesting that you please consider filing electronically using the application that I'm talking about in this presentation. There are also several notifications required by the generator improvement rules, and one of them is for small quantity generators and conditionally exempt generators who want to be opting into the episodic generator rules, because those rules give them a less stringent number of things to have to do if they follow the guidelines and the provisions. So there are 2 types of events you can have as an episodic generator, planned and unplanned. So if you have a planned event, you need to notify Ohio EPA at least 30 days prior to the event. You can't wait until the week before the waste is going to be picked up. You have to actually plan this out 30 days ahead and submit the paperwork. If it's an unplanned event, say a spill, then you need to notify Ohio EPA within 72 hours of the event occurring. All the episodic waste that you're generating has to be shipped off within 60 days. And when you fill out the form, you need to give us a start date and an end date that has to be no longer than a 60-day time interval. You have to have an EPA ID number and use the hazardous waste manifest. And your notification is going to consist of the RCRA Subtitle C Site ID form and an addendum form that lists information about the event and all the waste that you're generating during these 60 days. And an episodic generator who has opted into the rules and notified us will not have to fill out a biannual report. This is an example of the form that you would fill out. As you can see at the top, it has 2 columns, one for planned events and one for unplanned. And you need to provide contact information, the beginning and end dates, and descriptions of the waste. So if you have multiple wastes and you need more than one form, you can fill out multiple forms until you have listed all the wastes. You have to estimate the quantity in pounds and list the waste codes that will apply. There's also a requirement for an LQG that is closing their entire facility to notify Ohio EPA. You can also tell us when you are closing a central accumulation area, but that's optional to notify for. So you will do a minimum of 2 site ID submissions, one with the expected closure date and one with the final closure date. But if you have to revise the expected closure date, you'd re-notify again to tell us that. So using the electronic software makes this easy, because all you have to do is go in and update the information and then resubmit. And here's an example of the section of the form that contains these elements. You have boxes to mark whether it's the central accumulation area or the entire facility that is closing, and then fields for the dates. And you also need to tell us whether or not you were in compliance with the closure performance standards when you close for the final date. Another type of notification that's required is if an LQG decides to be a consolidator and that they will receive off-site hazardous waste from conditionally exempt generators that are under the control of the same person. There's an addendum form to submit along with the site ID form, and that addendum form lists all the CESQGs that you will be receiving waste from. Anytime that information changes, or anytime you file a biannual report, that addendum form would have to be supplied each time. For the biannual report, you will need to list the conditionally exempt generator waste on GM forms using a source code of G51, and it's reported separate from the LQG waste. So it's important that you have good records to keep track of what happened to the CESQG waste that you received. And here's an example of the form. It just consists of multiple identical sections that give you space to list the information about the CESQG or VSQG, as the new rules call a conditional exempt generator, and their address and contact information. Probably one of the notification requirements that has the most impact is the SQG renotification requirement. So as of September 1st of 2021, every SQG has to re-notify and then do it again every 4 years thereafter. And one of the main reasons this requirement has been put in is that we have generators that haven't updated their ID number since they initially got one. And I did some analysis, and about 18 to 20% of the current small quantity generators haven't notified since the 80s. And then I looked at it overall, and about 82% of our SQG universe has to re-notify. If your site notified as a SQG since September 1st, 2017, there will be a grace period. You don't have to re-notify if your last one was since that date. But if your last notification was before that, you do need to update. You can do it now and any time up until September 1st, 2021. So at the time I composed these slides, we had about 7,600 active SQGs, with active meaning they hadn't told us they were out of business. So we did some research using data that's available to us in the manifest database, in Biennial Report waste receipts. We looked at all these sites with Google Maps, and right now we're down to about 4,000 small quantity generators on the book. So that's still a lot. So food for thought. If you have an EPA ID number, do you know when your facility last updated that information and whether that information is accurate? So up-to-date EPA ID information is important to Ohio EPA and US EPA, because without accurate information, we can't really efficiently conduct oversight of our regulatory program. We need to know how many sites are still in business, what activities they're conducting, and who the contact people are for the sites. EPA ID information is available to the public on several federal websites that you may be familiar with. Envirofax, ECHO, and Microinfo Web are the main outlets for that. And in the new e-manifest system, the generator information is pulled anytime an EPA ID number is used to enter data. So it's pretty important that the information be current. So now we have a poll. Before attending this session, had you heard of the RCRA Info Industry app and the modules My RCRA ID or eManifest?
Okay, the polls have been open. Once you see it pop up on your screen, go ahead and make your selection. And remember, we can't see what you vote, so on these polls, just go ahead and have fun with it. Not on this particular one, but other ones, if you don't know the answer, just go ahead and select something. You might surprise yourself. Okay, it looks like about 70% of people have already voted, so get your selections in. The polls will be closing shortly. Okay, Paula, the polls have closed, and it looks like 56% of the people have heard of it before, and 44% no.
Oh, 56% is great. Hopefully some of you will sign up after attending this session. So what's in US EPA's RCRA Info Industry app that I keep talking about? So the two modules that are available in Ohio are MyRicker ID and eManifest. In MyRicker ID, you are simply filling out an online form for what's officially called your notification of regulated waste activity using the form that's called the RCRA Subtitle C site identification. You can update an existing EPA ID number, or you can request one for a new site. And if you're filling out a form for an existing number, it fills in the screen with everything that was in the previous record, and all you need to do is go through it and revise whatever needs changed and then submit it. eManifest started in June 30 of 2018, and it's a national manifest database that's run by US EPA. And if you get an account in the industry app and associate your facility's ID number with your account, you can view all the manifests that the TSDFs have sent in that have your EPA ID number on them. Users get a weekly digest email that lists the manifest activity by the manifest tracking number for any of your sites. And you can also get a data extract of manifest data in a PDF or spreadsheet type of a format. So why should you use MyRicker ID to notify? Well, I'm sure when you fill out an important form like this, you don't want to make a mistake. So the on-screen checks help you out, and they make sure that you don't leave something blank that's required, which would be embarrassing if we have to call you and point it out. It helps you do a much better quality submission, and it's quicker because, as I've mentioned, the previous record pre-populates the data fields. The processing time at Ohio EPA is shorter, and there's no paper involved. So when I wrote these slides, COVID wasn't a thing. So now it's even more important that you be able to do things online and more quickly so that there's no paper involved and there doesn't have to be any mail, since we don't have someone in the office every day anymore to check the mail. There are emails during the process that notify you of what's going on with your form, and you will get an email after Ohio EPA has processed the form to let you know it's been done. And one of the nice things about it is if you are responsible for multiple sites, even in different states, you can link all of those to your account and manage the records in one place. So with eManifest, you can view manifests for the EPA ID numbers that are associated with your industry app account. The receiving facilities have to send in the manifest within about 30 days of when they've signed off on them. And they have to type in the data that's on the manifest and provide that, as well as upload an image of the manifest. So you'll be able to see what's on the screen for the manifest as well as the image. And if you have an account, the TSDF has the option of not mailing the paper copies back to the generator because you're able to see them online. You won't have to maintain a paper file of manifests because those historical records are there to be viewed at any time. You can get the regular emails listing the manifest activity for the past week. Then you'll have an idea of how far your manifest has gotten in the process. You can use the manifest data to help you prepare your binary report by getting the data extract in spreadsheet form from the app. And then if any of your receivers switch to using fully electronic manifests, then you'll be all set up for when that happens if you want to draft them yourself. So this screen is an example of my test account where I have linked myself with several different facilities. And you can see at the bottom here, there are buttons for select existing site or request new site ID. This is if you were going to add a site to your account or request a new ID to be created for a site that doesn't have one. If I want to view the information for one of the facilities tied to my account, name of the facility, and then it will refresh the screen. And then this is the site details tab that you will see for an individual site that you've clicked on. And up at the top, it lists what the most current information is for the site and when it was last updated, as well as the mailing address and the site contact. This person's account also has an e-manifest permission, which I'll show next what that screen looks like. And then if the person had a MyRicker ID permission, there would be a third tab here, and you would click on that to go start a new site ID form. So this is what the eManifest tab looks like. You can see the manifest listings are by the manifest tracking number, and you can see the dates of shipment, receipt, who the receiver and the transporter are, as well as the status of the manifest. So, the manifest would go through multiple stages, but the endpoint is signed complete, which means the TSDF has signed off on it and uploaded it and certified that it's true and accurate. And the little icon here, the eyeball, is so you can view that. If you click on an individual manifest, this is the screen that you see. This is the top. It lists the manifest tracking number. And also, if you have permissions to certify or you are the site manager for the facility, you're able to actually make corrections to manifest. Here's the section that has the generator information. In the interest of time, I haven't shown the rest of the screen on these slides, but the next thing it shows is the waste information and then the dates of signature for the transporter and the generator and the TSDF. So to sign up for the industry app, of course, you need to have an account. Here is the login. You're logging into Ricker Info and clicking on the registration link and then following through with that. So basically, you fill in the required information to get an account. You search for the ID numbers that you want to associate with that, and then pick the permission level you want, and then Ohio EPA processes your request. Once that's complete, you'll get an email. And then you can go ahead and fill out forms or view manifests. So I want to talk about the permission levels for a second. The top two permission levels are the certifier and the site manager. They actually fill in a form and submit it. But a site manager is a super user who has at the highest level, and they can do all the permissions, plus they have the responsibility of approving users who make requests to also be associated with that ID number. So those requests would come to the site manager, not to Ohio EPA. It's really important that you have a at least one site manager in case someone leaves employment, because you need someone to process those user requests. When I process permission requests, I look at the user's job title and their organization information. I am trying to see what level of responsibility they have at the organization. Also, please note that we do not approve consultants to be certifiers or site managers. They can be a certifier if the client expressly gives us written permission that the consultant can do that. But most of the time, we expect consultants can be preparers or reviewers only. So if you're going to certify a submission as a certifier or site manager, the first time you log in after you get permissions, it'll pop up and want you to go through the electronic signature agreement process. So basically, this is a federal requirement for you to verify you are who you say you are. It's in the regulations, actually, for electronic reporting. So the personal information you're supplying, such as the last 4 digits of your social security number and your birth date, that is verified using LexisNexis, which is information that's out in the public domain that it's using to do that verification. The personal information is not saved in the system. It's just in there for the verification purpose. If for some reason it can't verify you, you can try again later, or you can print out a paper ESA, which needs signed and mailed, And on page 2, it'll give you an address on where to mail that. And please put in your legal name when you create your account, not a nickname. Like if your name is Richard and they call you Rich, please put in Richard, because that'll make it easier for LexisNexis to verify you. You won't be able to submit any forms until this part of the ESA processing is complete, but you only have to do this once, the first time, and then after that, you don't have to do it again. If you need to change your permissions, it's pretty easy. You log in and click on your name in the top right bar of the screen, and you'll get a menu. You select Profile. Then you go to the Site Permissions tab to see a list of sites associated with your account. You select the facility that you want to change permissions for, and then follow the prompts through there. And it gets processed by me, and then you'll get an email when that's done. If you change jobs, please know that you'll need to change your organization information to keep all that up to date. And the industry app accounts are actually central data exchange accounts. So if you already have a central data exchange account, when you register for RCR-Info for the first time, you can go ahead and put in those credentials. You don't have to create a separate account. To change your organizational information, you should log into CDX and do that. And if you need step-by-step instructions, email me and I'll send them to you. If you want to remove an EPID from your account because you've changed employment, you can change your permission level to none in the profile, which I just described on the previous slide. And please remember that if the staff who have the certification rights leave employment, you need to get another user set up to be the new certifier, or no one's going to be able to submit anything. So this slide lists web links for the web pages of interest. First one being where you can get the Ohio EPA site ID form, our MyRCR-ID support videos and FAQs. We have a video that steps you through the whole process of getting an account and filling out a form. If you're interested in the federal eManifest database, you can go to the Fed eManifest page. They have FAQs and a lot of information there. And if you want to go see what US EPA's database lists for your ID number, RCR-Info Web is the one I would recommend the most. It's updated once a week. And if you go to the hazardous waste sites link and then search by site, you can plug in your ID number and voila, it will show you what the current information is and what the date is on that. Another source of information is ECHO, which is compliance-based, and it gives compliance history for hazardous waste, air, and water. And then EnviroFacts. EnviroFacts has been around a long time. A lot of you probably heard of it. It's a multimedia site that lists ID numbers for all of the regulatory programs, but for the hazardous waste information, it's only updated once a month. And that is why I recommend you use RCR-Info Web instead. So here are the federal app URLs for RCR-Info, where you can go to log in with your CDX account and create an account for RCR-Info there. Or if you want to go to the Central Data Exchange because you need to update your account, there's the URL for that. And there are some fact sheets in the handout section. There's one on eManifest that has general information. And there's also a fact sheet about MyRCR-ID that has the web links and a lot of information about the advantages of doing it. A lot of the same things I covered in this presentation. So our last poll is, after attending this session, are you more likely to use the RCR-Info Industry app?
Okay, the polls have opened. Please go ahead and make your selection. Okay, we have about 70% voted. The polls will be closing momentarily. Please make your selection. Okay, we've closed the polls with about 72% voted. 83% of them said yes, they would use it. Paula?
Wow, that's great. I expect to be busy the next few days processing requests from everybody. So here's the list of contacts for the Ricker info, final report, and site ID form. Lexi and Stella work with me, and I'm the lead for the information management program for hazardous waste. And if you go to the notification page, there's a contact tab that has the same information. So the key takeaways from today's presentation is to please utilize the Ricker Info Industry app to keep track of the information US EPA has about your site. Remember to plan your episodic generator event ahead of time. Record keeping is important. Understand who the new pharmaceutical rule applies to, and know what will no longer carry the P075 waste code listing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tammy and Paula. We're now going to begin the Q&A session of the presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. We do have a lot of questions, so we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. If you do not hear your question, the presenters will reach out to you after the conference. Your question will get answered, so don't worry, it just may not be answered right now. You can also email the presenter if you would like to ask a more detailed question after the session. We will begin with questions for Tammy regarding the new hazardous waste rules. So Tammy, does airbag waste have to be sent on hazardous waste manifest when shipped from the handler or collector's facility?
No, if the airbag waste is being managed under the exclusion, it would not have to be shipped on a hazardous waste manifest, but they would need to make sure that they're complying with DOT requirements.
Great, thank you. Do you have a list of what pharmaceuticals are hazardous when disposed?
We do not have a complete list. There are some pharmaceuticals that have been identified as being hazardous when disposed, but as you can imagine, new drugs are created every day, and as thousands of over-the-counter and prescription drugs are currently approved for sale in the United States, it would be difficult to provide a number or even a list of the pharmaceuticals that would be considered hazardous waste. For example, I think there are about 30 commercial chemical products on the P and the U list that have pharmaceutical uses. So if you take one of those, for example, one that's used to create chemotherapy drugs, you could have 6 different manufacturers creating their own chemotherapy drug. So for that reason, we simply can't, it'd be difficult to keep up with all of those. And our recommendation is just as with any other waste, if it's a solid waste, it could be considered a hazardous waste if it meets a listing or exhibits a characteristic.
Great, thank you. Next question. Are e-cigarettes considered an over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapy?
No, as of today, they have not been approved for sale as over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapies. And if they do become approved for that in the future, that P75 listing would not automatically go away. That would be something that US EPA would have to undertake a new rulemaking and amend the P75 listing to exclude those.
Great, thank you. Next question. Who can be considered an airbag waste handler?
Well, the handlers are the people who are collecting that waste and managing it under that conditional exemption. So that could include any sort of repair facility or collision center, automobile dealers, and salvage vendors, pretty much anyone who's collecting under that conditional exemption.
Great, thank you. Do the collected airbags count toward generator status?
No, if they're being managed under the exclusion, they would not count toward your generator status.
Okay. Can the nicotine gums and patches be thrown in the trash now?
So not today, but starting on Monday, October 5th, when the rule becomes effective, those excluded items will no longer carry the listing and they can be thrown in the trash.
Great, thank you. Okay, does the sewer prohibition apply to pharmaceutical manufacturers?
Well, it doesn't apply to pharmaceutical manufacturers unless they are also a reverse distributor. The definition legally applies only to healthcare facilities and reverse distributors with respect to those hazardous waste pharmaceuticals. But both US EPA and Ohio EPA, again, strongly discourage the sewering of any pharmaceutical under any setting.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. We still have more questions for you, but I'd like to get a couple questions in for Paula. So Paula, are you ready?
Sure.
Do you think MyRCRA Aid will eventually create an app to download and complete the information on phones?
It already works on phones. They designed the app so that it would work on multiple devices.
Great, thank you. Can a person serve as a site manager for multiple facilities? Do they have to set up
Sure.
each site individually?
The site manager would just link the multiple EPA ID numbers to their account. For example, we have someone who does all the notifications for all the CVS pharmacies in the whole country, and he's got every single number tied to his account.
Great, thanks. If we utilize the episodic notification option, can we submit notice prior to a tank cleaning event and later update Ohio EPA if the analytical shows the waste as being non-hazardous?
Yes, if you let us know that it turned out to be non-hazardous, we will delete the application from the database in case you need to go back and do a real episodic later in the year, since you can only have one planned and one unplanned event in a calendar year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tammy and Paula. Right now we are at 11 o'clock, so I don't want to go over. Like I said, we will answer your questions. You will receive an email answering your questions. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Hazardous Waste Rules, What's Coming Down the Line. If you have any additional questions, please contact Tammy or Paula directly or call our office. As I mentioned earlier, once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would appreciate if you would complete that to provide us your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, a certificate of attendance, and another link to the survey, just in case you don't have a chance to complete it right now. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope you are able to participate in more of Ohio EPA's virtual compliance conference this afternoon. We have our a deeper dive into into the universal waste and use oil rules. Tomorrow we have the US EPA updates with Region 5 Administrator Kurt Feed. Hopefully I said his name right. And at 2 o'clock tomorrow, we have Encouraging Environmental Excellence Award Ceremony. So hopefully you guys can participate in that. And thank you again. Have a great day.